So we're going to study the living things. And the first thing that we need to know about living things is the difference between a living thing and a non-living thing. And it looks like we already know this. We know that these animals or this plant are living things, and we know that the bicycle or the robot are non-living things. The things are not that easy. Think, for example, in the cow or the meat that is coming from a cow. Uh, it's very complicated to know why the cow is a living thing and the meat is a non-living thing. They are made of the same things, they have the same components, they're almost the same. So why the cow is a living thing and why the meat is a non-living thing? To understand this difference, we need to know that all the living things, all of them, no exception, they have two characteristics. They are going to perform the three life processes and they are going to be made of cells. If we have anything in the nature that perform the three life processes and is made of cells, we can say it's a living thing. If it's not having one of these two characteristics, we know that it's a non-living thing. So we need to know these two characteristics to be able to analyze the difference between living things and non-living things. Let's see it. First, the three life processes. This is something that we know from previous years, but we are going to review it very fast. We know that the three life processes are nutrition. Nutrition is the skill that have the living things to take energy or matter from the environment and use it to grow or develop. For example, this squirrel is eating this corn, but other living thing, for example, I don't know, a plant, is going to absorb the energy of the sun. These two things, absorb the energy of the sun or eating a corn, are different ways of nutrition. Also, another life processes is the sensitivity. Sensitivity is the skill that have the living things to perceive, to feel the environment, change in the environment, and to react to those changes. For example, this is a plant, La Mimosa pudica, that can perceive when somebody is touching it. If you touch the plant is going to feel it and is capable to react to that change, in this case bending the leaves and changing the shape of the entire plant. So this is an example. I mean, sensitivity is something that is very easy to see in animals because we can see how they run, how they jump, but we can also see it, for example, in this plant. That is very obvious that this plant can perceive the environment and make a reaction to the changes that is feeling. The third life processes that all the living things are going to have is reproduction. Reproduction is the skill that have living things to produce other living things very similar to him, but a smaller version in this case. This duck is having ducklings that are very, very similar to him, and they are going to be ducks when they grow up. So this capability to produce another living things similar to him is one of the three life processes that is going to be in all the living things. But this is not only about the three life processes. We also need that all the living things are going to be made of cells. If they are not made of cells, they are not going to be living things. The cells are the basic units of life, and we have two, and we can classify all the living things in two types depending on if they have only one cell, we are going to call them unicellular, and if they have more than one, we are going to call it multicellular. For example, a bacteria is an example of a unicellular living thing, and a human, like you or me, are examples of multicellular living things because we are made of a lot of cells, more than one for sure. These cells they have another characteristic. They are very, 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 very small. Very small. I don't know if it's clear, but they are very, very small. They are so small that we cannot see it. We have to use a specific tool that is called microscope to see those cells. But how small are cells? It's very complicated to imagine how small is a cell. So I have made an example. This is me. Imagine that my height is 2 meters. It's not, but it's easier to make the maths, okay? So this is me, this is a goat. So imagine that I'm 2 meters tall. I'm not, I'm telling you, but imagine that because it's easier. And this goat is more or less 1. So something that is, if I'm 2 meters tall, something that is 10 times smaller than me could be, for example, a notebook. One of your notebooks is 10 times smaller than me, more or less. So it means that if I put 10 notebooks, 1, 1, 1, 1 until 10, it's going to be more or less as tall as me. More or less, of course. So you can imagine that this is 10 times smaller than me. Something 10 times smaller than a notebook could be, for example, an ant. This is an ant. Ants are 10 times smaller than a notebook. It means that I need 10 ants, 1, 1, 1, 1, to make a notebook, and I need 10 notebooks, 1, 1, 1, 1, to make a Salvador. So it means that I'm going to need 100 ants making a line to make something as tall as me. Okay, we are becoming smaller, but we need to go even further. So imagine that I have something 10 times smaller than an ant. That could be a louse. You know, a louse is this animal that is disgusting, that when you have it in your head, it's scratching, it's itching all the time. Very, very uncomfortable. So this animal is 10 times smaller, remember, than an ant. So it means that I need 10 of these making a line to make something as big, as tall as an ant. And it means that I need 100 of them to make something as tall as a notebook, for example, or 1000 to make a Salvador. Are you following me? Because this is going to become smaller, because I need something 10 times smaller than a louse. And that could be, for example, an amoeba. An amoeba is the biggest unicellular living thing. Remember, a unicellular living thing is a living thing that is made of only one cell, but this is like the giant of the unicellular living things. It's really, really big for being a unicellular living thing. Of course, it's a unicellular living thing. It's 10 times smaller than the louse, so it's microscopical. We cannot see it. An amoeba like this, only with our eyes, we are going to need a microscope, but it's going to be anyway a very, very big unicellular living thing. So we are going to need something smaller than an amoeba, and we are going to make something 100 times smaller than an amoeba to see how it's a regular cell. Those are cells from a plant. In this case, they are cells from an onion. So we cannot see it, but onions are made of millions and millions of cells like this one. So remember, the cell of an onion, this one or this one, are 100 times smaller than the amoeba. And remember that the amoeba is 10 times smaller than the louse. Remember that the amoeba is 10 times smaller than the ant. And remember that the ant is 10 times smaller than the notebook. And remember that the notebook is 10 times smaller than me. So this is how small is a cell. Very, very, very small. So these very, very, very small cells that we know that all the living things are made of, let's see how is a cell. Cells, they can have very different shapes. They can be very, very different, but they have several characteristics in common. For example, to imagine how is a cell, we are going to use an example. Imagine that a cell is like a balloon. Remember a balloon? So a cell is like a balloon. We are going to imagine that. If a cell is like a balloon, this part of the cell, the most external part of the cell, that is called membrane, could be like the balloon itself. This is the part that difference between inside and outside. It's the same here. The balloon is what makes possible that we have air or water inside and air and water outside, that they are different. So if we take out the membrane or the balloon, what is going to happen? That everything breaks. So it's a very, very important part. So we have this layer, the external layer, that is making a difference between inside and outside, also in the balloon or in my cell. And imagine now, guys, that in this balloon is filled with water, not with air. Imagine that it's filled with water, like a water balloon that you use in summer when it's very hot. So my cell is also going to be filled by water. It's going to have a lot of water inside. It's not water exactly. It's called, all the water, all this liquid that we have inside of the membrane is called cytoplasm. This is the name. Cyto means cell in Latin, and plasm means liquid in Latin. So cytoplasm means liquid from the cell. Very easy name if you know Latin. So it's not water exactly, but it's a jelly-like substance. It's like jelly, is like, and the composition is very similar to water. So also here in this water, remember the water balloon, we imagine that I have things floating that I put inside of the balloon. I don't know, on a stone or something that I want to have inside of that balloon for any reason. So my cell is going to have also things inside the membrane floating in this water. Those things are called organelles. The organelles are these structures here, that the cell needs to perform the three vital functions, the three life processes that we have seen before, to make nutrition, reproduction, or sensitivity. They need these organelles that they have here floating in the cytoplasm contained by the membrane. So there are an organelle that is very important, the most important of all of them, that is the nucleus. This is very special. Actually, it's more than organelle, it's the most important part of the cell. Here in the nucleus we have all the genetic information of the cell, so all the information that we need to make a new cell. So it's a very important part. This type of cell that we have here, with the nucleus, organelle, cytoplasm, the membrane, and this shape, like a rounded shape more or less, is the typical animal cell. All the cells that look like that, we are going to call them animal cell, even if we see this cell in something that is not an animal. All the animals, they are going to have animal cells, but we can find animal cells in other living things that they are not animals. For example, a lot of microorganisms, like the amoeba that we have seen before, they have animal cells. So these animal cells are very common in the nature. We can find them almost everywhere. This animal cell, they can have typically this shape, but we have also other possible shape. So imagine that I take my balloon, this balloon here, the balloon that I have before, with the membrane, with the water, with the organelles, and I put this balloon inside of a box. I know that sounds weird, but we have a lot of cells that look like that. Our cell inside of a box. Of course, we are not going to call this cover a box. This is called the cell wall. The cell wall is a natural cover that keep the cell shape. For example, this cell has the shape of a square, and this is possible because the cell wall is keeping this square shape. So these cells that have the cell wall, they are called plant cells, and here we have the same situation that we had with the animal cell. Yes, all the cells that we are going to have in the plant, they are going to be plant cells, but we can have plant cells in other living things that they are not plants. I know that sounds weird, but it's like that. So the cell wall is the most important characteristic of the plant cell, but it's not the only one. So the plant cells, they are going to have, of course, all the other components that we found in the animal cell. They have the membrane here inside. So after the cell wall, inside here, we are going to have the membrane that we had in the animal cell. We are going to have the cytoplasm, remember this jelly-like substance that is like water, and we are going to have nucleus and the other organelles floating around. But there are also another organelle, this one that is specific from plant cells. We are going to find this organelle, the chloroplast, here in plant cells, but we cannot see chloroplast in these cells, in the animal cells. So if we find a living thing with chloroplast, we know for sure that it's going to be a plant cell. So the plant cell is a very interesting organelle because it's there responsible to absorb the sun energy in the plants. So the sun energy is absorbed by the chloroplast in the plants and is going to produce the matter, the food that the plant is going to need for growing and developing. So this is the reason, the chloroplast, because plants can perform photosynthesis and they can live absorbing the energy of the sun, and animals can't because they have chloroplast that can make this function, and animals they don't have this organelle, the chloroplast, that can absorb the energy of the sun. So maybe you can think why we have this cell with the cell wall in plants and we don't have this cell wall in animals. So the most important reason, the most important function, of the cell wall is that we can put this cell one beside the other. I can put one box, another here, another here, another here, and they are going to keep their structure. Remember that plants, imagine a tree for example, they don't have bones, they don't have muscles, so they use this rigid structure provided by the cell wall to keep their shape. And this is necessary in plants, is probably not that necessary in animal cells, or at least they have found other ways to keep their structures. We are going to talk about the organization of the living thing. And if you remember, we can classify living things in unicellular and multicellular living things. Let's focus for now in multicellular living things like this mouse. Multicellular living things, they are made of cells, and this mouse or any multicellular living thing are going to have a lot of different type of cells. So we have specific cells for specific functions. For example, in an animal we can find stem cells, intestinal cells, blood cells, muscle cells, liver cells, or nerve cells with very different shapes and structures because they have very different functions. So different functions, different shapes to perform that functions. These cells, they are usually not alone in a multicellular living thing. They organize, they work together, forming a tissue. A tissue is a group of cells that have the same function and work together. For example, we have the connective tissue, or the epithelial tissue, or the muscle tissue, or the nervous tissue. Remember, we have the muscle here, a muscle cell here, and they organize making a muscle tissue that work together. Or the nerve cells that we had here, they make nervous tissue. That this means that they are working together. Or the skin that we have in our bodies is just a tissue made of a lot of cells, epithelial cells, working together, forming an epithelial tissue. So these tissues, they organize themselves, making organ. An organ is a group of tissues with the same function that are working together. So for example, when we have the heart, in a heart we have different type of muscle tissues working together, or the brain we have different nervous tissue working together. So a lot of different tissues that work together performing the same function is an organ. And a group of organs that work together is going to be finally an organism. An organism is made of cells that organize in tissues that they organize in organs, making the organism. I don't know if you can see here this cycle that we are analyzing. And this is everything for now. Thank you.